All right, so this is the orientation for Reading is Resistance, Fall 2022. I'm going to share my screen in a second once I figure out what I'm doing. Okay, I made a Google slideshow and I'm going to share that. Yeah. And I am also in a slideshow mode. Okay. If you would like to ask a question, just speak out or you can type into the chat. I think that will also pop up for me. I can't see all of you obviously right now because I'm presenting, but I want to answer questions as they come. So this is the Reading is Resistance volunteer orientation. Really happy to have you here, really committed to what we do as an organization and excited about the work that we can do together. Okay, so this is the section of the presentation which is about our why we do what we do. I have some statistics here. The most recent statistics we have from some organizations are still back in 2018. We do have some from 2020 as well. This is from the Cooperative Children's Book Center, which is an organization that takes in a bunch of children's books and analyzes the diversity in these books each year. This is a chart that shows what they found in 2018. So I'm going to go through what we see here and just be thinking about what you notice in the statistics and what questions come up for you. You don't need to speak them out loud if you don't want to, but just think about what you're seeing here. So in their review of 3,124 books from US publishers in 2018 of children's literature and YA literature, 10% of the total number of books had significant African or African American content. And of these, 49% were own voices. Own voices is a term that is somewhat debated right now in the children's book world. Some people use it, some people don't. It basically means that the author of the book has the same or similar identities as the protagonists in the book, so that someone is writing from their own identity experience. Okay, so you can see here that 51% of books written about African or African American protagonists were not written by African or African American authors. 7% of the total number of books had significant Asian or Asian American content, and of these, 47% were own voices. 5% of the total number of books had significant Latinx content, and of these, 57% were own voices. And 1% of the total number of books had significant First Nations or Native American content, and of these, 83% were own voices. In 2020, this is the data that we have, and for some reason they didn't represent how many of these were own voices in the 2020 statistics, but this is what we know from the Cooperative Children's Book Center in 2020 about representation. Representation in children's and YA books showed that 41% of folks represented in these books were white, 29% were animal characters, 12% were Black characters, 9% were Asian characters, 6% were Latinx characters, and 3% of characters represented had a disability. You can see in the very, very bottom, there's a tiny, you may or may not be able to see this, depending on your eyesight, so I'll read this to you, that only 0.001% of representation was from Pacific Islander characters in books. 0.008% was of Arab characters, and 0.15% was of Indigenous characters. Are there any comments or questions yet? So continue just to think about what you're seeing and what you're curious about when you see these statistics. Okay, so here we have a picture of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. And we use her theory about books, and many people who work with children's literature use her theory about books to think about representation in diverse libraries. So she talked about books as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. She said books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So one of the frameworks that we use is this mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors framework, looking for books that provide all children, all young readers with mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors in their reading. Besides providing these sort of portals and mirrors, reading diverse books also does these things. And this is from a We Need Diverse Books article. They're one of the most important organizations supporting diverse authors of children's literature. So reading diverse books also does these things: builds unity and inclusivity, seeds discussions about current events, history, and more, and helps us to find our commonalities. It also informs us so that we can take action in our communities. Okay, so on to why Reading is Resistance was started. So my partner and I, he's pictured here. I'm on the very top right of this picture wearing a hat and scarf, and my husband is next to me with a beard. And this is a picture with Santa and our entire family. So our two combined, our children together are here on the front on Santa's lap. And then my husband has 3 other daughters as well. And so combined, this is our family. We started Reading as Resistance sort of out of reading with our children, spending family reading time and thinking about wanting to see our family represented and how important that was for our children, and also wanting to make sure our kids are well informed about history, justice, and action. When our kids started going to school, we also saw that there was really still a lack of representation on the bookshelves and in stories that are being read in school. So as our kids got older, we saw that many of the stories being read aloud or offered on the shelves were centering on white protagonists, white families. And so we decided to create a book project to support teachers and families in diversifying the books that they had on their shelf or that they were getting from the library. And as soon as we started doing that work with teachers, we realized that teachers also needed support in having conversations with kids about the things in the books, about identity, about diversity, and about justice. So I started writing curriculum to accompany the books, and it became a bigger and bigger project. And I started teaching other people to also create curriculum so that we can all have these important conversations. We really started to ramp up in response to events in 2016 with the election of former President Trump and a lot of the values that were being pushed out into our communities that were hostile to diversity. And then also we became bigger during the pandemic and during the social justice uprising in 2020. Helping parents and supporting teachers and continuing to have important conversations with kids. So this is what we do. We teach and design anti-oppression and anti-racist curriculum. We host workshops with adults who work with young readers. We help grown-ups to start more difficult conversations with family, friends, and colleagues. And we do creative actions in community. Here's a little bit about the language that we use to talk about our justice practice in our organization. So we use a definition of anti-racist from scholar Ibram X. Kendi, who's written a ton of different things, including Stamped from the Beginning and Anti-Racist Parenting. So racist is defined as one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. Anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. So at any time, Ibram X. Kendi says that people can be racist in one moment and anti-racist in the next, and that supremacy cultures are kind of the water that we're swimming in, and that we have to actively push back against them in order to create a different kind of culture. Sometimes we also use the language anti-oppression. Anti-oppression work seeks to recognize the oppression that exists in our society and attempts to mitigate its effects and eventually equalize the power imbalance in our communities. So that's another term that we sometimes use. We also know that a lot of the language used is anti, so it sounds a little bit negative. And so we're also pro-liberation, we're pro-radical imagination, belonging, healing, reflection, identity, diversity, joy, and justice. The ways that we seek to embody anti-racist practice are by centering those stories authored by Black, Indigenous, and other authors of color, to value learning about justice alongside joy in the books that we read, to go beyond heroes and holidays, so not just like only reading about Dr. King every year, but reading about many, many different people and many movements, to teach anti-racist history and movement over time, and to connect and understand ourselves as part of history and of present movements for justice. Okay, I'm gonna pause for a second. Are there any questions yet? Is everyone okay? I know this is a lot of information all at once. Okay. Okay. So because we write curriculum and we work with teachers in addition to community, we use standards, like any kind of education uses standards, right? So like we have math standards, we have literacy standards. There are actually social justice learning standards put out by an organization called Learning for Justice. And we use these social justice standards to inform us about what concepts need to be taught at what ages for us to grow our justice abilities over time, from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12 and beyond. So I'm talking to you about these standards because you're going to see them in the curriculum. You're going to see them with the discussion questions. And if you're a curriculum writer and editor, you'll be using these to kind of assess if you're asking appropriate questions to build someone's justice capacity at the age of the book that you're working with, if that makes sense. So the Learning for Justice standards are divided into 4 different categories of learning. So there's identity learning, diversity learning, justice learning, and action learning. And I will share out this presentation with you afterwards as well. This is the full list of standards. I think I'll go to it. It's basically like a document that they have that talks about the standards. We are often using just the K through 2 standards. We do a lot of work with picture books. So I'm going to go to that area. And so again, if you've taken a class with a syllabus, or if you've done any work in education, you've probably seen objectives and standards like this. The chart might look a little bit scary, but really what it's just showing is, what can a kindergartner through a 2nd grader learn at their age about these 4 categories, about identity, about diversity, about justice, and about action, that will help them build their skills and their understanding, so that by the time they're a grown-up, they'll have tons of skills and the ability to talk about all sorts of issues of power, issues of identity, etc. So for an example, one of the standards at the very beginning is just identity 1, knowing and liking who you are, that you can talk about your family and name some of your identities, for example. So the standards are not rocket science, but I think they're a good thing for us to anchor to know if we're building the skills that are needed to grow capacity for this kind of justice practice for kids, if that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions about that part? Okay, so our next move is that we're going to take a field trip to an example of anti-racist curriculum that we've created at Reading is Resistance. And so for those of you who are reading buddies, you are actually going to be using the curriculum with your reading buddies, meaning that you're going to look at the curriculum before you read with your reading buddy, and you're going to use some of the questions and exercises from the curriculum with your reading buddy. For those of you who are creating and editing curriculum, you'll be designing something using this template based on what our curriculum looks like. So you'll be kind of following that pattern as you design your own content. Okay. So this, can you all see the Arabic quilt? Just want to make sure. Can someone let me know out loud?
We can see.
Okay, thank you. Also, good to know you're still with me. Okay. This is more talking than I will ever do just by myself. It's really a lot, but I want you to have this information. Okay, so this is one of our curriculum pieces that I created for teachers and for parents on the book, The Arabic Quilt, which is just a beautiful book. Really, it's about being in school. It's about identity. It's about, it seeds conversations about xenophobia and migration, and also how to apologize and repair. It's really, really, really good one. So in your reading guides, you will have, you'll see a first section that's just an introduction to the book. So first page is always a little introduction. Some of this is just standard language, but introduces the book. We write a book summary. So 1 or 2 paragraphs on what the book is about. We also pull out book themes so that a teacher or parent, maybe they're looking for a book on a particular topic like migration, can see this book would be appropriate for what they wanted to teach and talk about. Excuse me. The second section is just about the philosophy behind our curriculum. That's going to be standard for all of our reading guides. Will have the same language, so you don't have to make it up yourself. It just talks about many of the things that we'll actually be learning in this class. We're learning about social justice standards. We're learning about abolitionist practice, decolonization, heart and body practices, and also white anti-racist practice. It's basically just kind of shows the philosophies behind what we do. So this language you don't have to come up with. It's just going to be standard for all of the guides, as is this. This just talks about how to read with a buddy or in community. So if you are reading buddy, you'll look through these and it will tell you a little bit about how to approach the curriculum with whichever reader or readers you're choosing to read with. And again, that's standard language. So for those of you writing curriculum, that's just going to be cut and pasted into what you do. Okay, now we get down to the juicy part. This section, so after we have the section about our philosophy, there's a section that really digs into the social justice standards from Learning for Justice. So for a teacher or for someone who's a reading buddy, this is really just informative to you to know what kinds of skills you're building in the conversation that you'll be having. So for teachers, this might be important because they might have to meet certain standards, like they might have to meet certain goals around diversity in their classroom. So this maps how this book and how this guide helps kiddos to meet those standards. For just an everyday reading buddy, it might just show you a little bit more about the bigger concepts that are being learned reading together. If you're writing the curriculum, oops, sorry about that. If you're a curriculum writer and editor, you will be looking at the Learning for Justice standards and thinking about what pieces of those standards can be learned by the book that you choose. So I like to read a book first a couple of times, and then I think about, so the Arabic quilt teaches a lot about identity, teaches about who you are, how to describe where you come from, teaches a little bit about action. There's an action that needs to be taken after some harm happens between students. And so I just map the kind of questions that I write to those objectives sort of as I go. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, when you have questions later, you can let me know. Usually you have to dive into this before you have a lot of questions. Okay, then comes the section. So after we have the social justice standards section, we have the discussion questions. And again, these are designed to increase our capacity for justice reflection, conversation, and action. So I'm always thinking about what would help someone to grow while reading this book. How does this book help them to grow in these certain areas? And I'm thinking about the social justice standards. What do I know about kiddos from kindergarten to second grade, what they can be learning right now? And then that's how I design the questions. And a lot of them seem pretty simple, but are important building blocks. So for example, this book is called The Arabic Quilt. The first question is just an imagination question. Read the book title. What do you know about quilts? If you were going to pick fabrics to make a quilt, what would they be? What colors and patterns would you choose? And then it moves into some identity questions. In the first pages of this book, the main character, Kenzie, is sitting with her family and they're eating breakfast. And so the questions are more about identity. What are some of Kenzie's identities that we learn about as the story begins? What foods does she eat for breakfast in the story? What is one of your favorite breakfasts that you eat? All of that is teaching kiddos about identity, how to describe your identities. And in the second question, also about learning about that we have similarities with people and that we also have differences with people. Then I just go page by page with questions in that same manner. You'll see the questions here. This is probably more extensive than you will be doing if you're a curriculum writer, so don't worry. This is something I do also professionally for teachers, so I have to be particularly thorough. But any of you who are writing curriculum, we're going to also put those on the website for teachers and for parents to use. So, you know, be as thorough as you want to be. Okay, after the discussion questions, we have a resource and action guide. Usually we add some information about the author and illustrator, if there is one. And then I just think about what kind of resources would be fun to extend the learning based on the story in the book. So this book has an Egyptian quilt in the book that Kenzie curls up in. I think that her aunt gave her. And there is this very special Egyptian applique process. So I brought in some resources for people to learn about that. And then I also found a cool Sewing for Social Justice organization. In the book, the class makes their own quilt together with all of their names in Arabic. And so I found some resources on cool ways to make quilts for justice. And so those are just resources that a teacher or parent could use to extend the learning, to do activities, to talk about the issues in the book further. So you're just going to look sort of like online, see what kinds of cool resources there are on the author, illustrator, and about topics that are in the book if you're a curriculum writer. And if you're a reading buddy, you might click around on some of these resources before you read with your reader and decide, hey, I want to show this video, or like I want to make a little paper quilt with my buddy. That part's up to you. The last part of the reading guide, I swear this is the end, is just what to read next. And so I always give a selection of picture books and middle reader books that are on similar topics to the book that is highlighted in the curriculum. So the Arabic Quilt is both about migration, it's about Arab American identity, it's about belonging. So I find other books on similar topics and I list them as possible read next books. So for curriculum writers, you'll be kind of Googling around and seeing what other books might have touch points with the main book that you're writing about. You can also email me and I'm happy to give you a list of books that might go with the book that you've read. And for reading buddies, this might be a chance to get other books that are related to the main book that you read and read those with your reading buddy as well, if they're interested. Okay, that's that part. Okay, so that's the example of the curriculum. I'm going to stop there for a second as well. Any questions at this point? Okay, going back to sharing my screen. We're almost done. You're doing great. Okay, so for curriculum writers, you will receive a curriculum template from me, a copy of a template that you can use to add your own information. So you don't have to recreate these templates from scratch. I'm going to give you a template that you can add in all the pieces that you need to for your curriculum. So you'll be receiving that through Canvas. You won't start writing your first curriculum guide until next week. So you have time. And for reading buddies, you'll also be just choosing a book next week to read with your reading buddies and then starting to read with them in week 3. So you're going to have time to kind of work through these materials and get comfortable with them and ask me questions. Okay, so this is the final piece. This is the overview of these roles. So if you're a curriculum writer and editor, this is a role overview for you. The curriculum writing process is that next week you will receive the title of an assigned book for your first curriculum. I assign the first book just so that you don't have to also worry about finding a book. I'm going to give you a book that's about sort of more generally building community so that you can practice with your curriculum writing. For your second book that you select later in the term, you're going to select a book that intersects with one or more of your own identities. So you will get to pick a second book when you're writing your curriculum. But the first book I'll assign to you just to make your process a little bit easier. The next step would be that you'll find a YouTube read aloud of the book or get a copy of the book from the library. So all of these books are available in the library and also on YouTube as read alouds. So you don't have to buy any of these books. You're going to listen or read to the book a few times to get familiar with it. Then you're going to go to the Learning for Justice standards and select standards that you think this book would teach well. And then follow the curriculum template to complete your draft. Each time you create a draft, you have 2 weeks to complete it. So you'll start your draft in 1 week and then you'll complete your draft in the next before we do a review process. And then everyone who's written will also be part of the editing process. You'll be giving big picture feedback and doing basic proofreading for your peers who are also writing curriculum. Before you edit, always make sure you listen to or read the story that the curriculum is designed for. Keep a copy of the social justice standards open so you can reference it while you're editing to give good feedback and advice to the other curriculum writer. And then you're just going to use the comment feature in Google to give feedback. If there are little changes like commas or things like spelling, just change those directly in the document. And that process will happen after you all have written. So it'll be in several weeks. Any curriculum writers or editors have questions so far? Okay. For community reading buddies, first of all, you're going to find your buddy or buddies. So it can be anyone in your life. I'd recommend reading with 2 people if you can, but 1 is fine as well. You can be in a pair, but you might want to be in a little group. It might bring more interesting conversation. You can choose someone young, like a kid. It can even, you can read to babies. You can read to your sibling. You can also read with a coworker or a partner, a friend, roommate, and you can read up with older folks like a parent or an elder. So your buddy or your buddies can be anyone. I'm going to give you a list of suggested books with their reading guides for your first meeting. And you're going to download the reading guide for the book. You'll go through the book either on YouTube or you'll get it from the library. And you'll look through the reading guide before working with your reading buddy so that you're prepared. You'll look through the questions and the extended activities to have some options in mind when you're learning together. And then you're going to read the story with your buddy or buddies and use selected questions to initiate conversations along the way. Some folks find that reading through once without stopping and then going back and reading it again to do the discussion part works best, but it's up to you and your buddy. Also up to the attention span of your buddy, depending on age. You know, if you have a little one, might not be able to read it twice, but with adults, you definitely could. And then each week you'll take notes on your experience reading, like what you learned from having that reading and conversation experience, and submit them. There will be an assignment specifically for you that will pop up. Now that I have all of your names, I'm going to assign specific, you'll see it in Canvas for you. And then you'll share out selected quotes or thoughts that you might want to share out to the public twice during the term. Reading buddies, do you all have any questions?
So for the first week, we use like books from the Reading Is Resistant, but how about the following books?
Yeah, so each week you're actually going to be choosing from our selection of books. I'll give you a list of all the books we have reading guides on, because the idea is that you're having specific types of conversations, building the social justice capacity of whoever you're working with and yourself as part of the reading. So you will be using the books that we've selected and the guides, but you'll find that there's a lot of variety in what you can choose.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so for this week, your only assignment is to have come to this orientation. So good job. I think you'll have to mark that as done. Maybe I'll look at Canvas and see, but you don't have to do anything else but like attend and say you attended. In week 2, writers and editors will be assigned your book 1 on Canvas, and reading buddies will be given a list of first books to start with, and we'll choose one also in Canvas. And so the next week will be spent getting started. Again, for reading buddies, you don't start reading with your buddy until week 3. So you still have time to figure out who that will be. And next week will be about just preparing, like reading the story you've chosen and reading through the guide so that you're prepared for your first meeting. And then in week 2, writers and editors, you'll be assigned your first book, and you'll just start to read that book and start looking at the template, maybe put in, start drafting their curriculum, but you don't have to finish. You'll have 2 weeks to do that. So next week's getting started. Yeah, question?
Deborah, I had a question. Does that mean our next meeting, is that where we would get the volunteer hours from?
So let's see. So your volunteer hour, like for this week, was just coming to this meeting. And any other correspondence you've done with me picking your role. Next week will be, your hours will come from selecting a book from the list, because I think you're a reading buddy, and doing that pre-work before you meet with your reader. So that'll be your hours for the week. And then week 3, your hours will actually be with whoever you're reading with.
Oh, okay. I see. I get you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Yeah. I know it's a lot at first. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And for people who are writing curriculum, this week, again, your hours are coming just from coming to this orientation. Next week, your hours will be selecting, looking at your assigned book and just getting started on figuring out how to write and using the template. Okay, any other questions? if you're like me, you'll have to like go into like, I'll give you this slideshow so that you can kind of look at it and process. And questions might come up as you look at the materials on your own. So please don't hesitate to email me. If you need a meeting with me, like a quick Zoom meeting, that's totally fine. You can also text me. I imagine that you'll just be needing some time to look at the materials and kind of come up with questions as you get settled in. Okay, cool. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, everybody. Stop.